Good morning, boys and girls, and welcome back from vacation. It is now the year of 2021, and I hope that you had a fun, safe holiday and you guys are ready to learn. So, for reading starting now, we are switching gears completely. We spent most of the beginning of the year in this side of our anchor chart, the fiction side. We read stories that had characters and problems and settings and solutions. We talked about beginning, middle, and end. We talked about how characters had feelings. Now we're going to switch gears and we're going to move to this side, the nonfiction side. So what we're going to do today is we're going to talk about what are the differences between fiction and nonfiction, okay? So fiction stories have certain elements and nonfiction story has certain elements. That's what makes these two types of book different. So when we're thinking about all of our fiction elements, we need to be thinking about what we've been doing for the past few months, really. We've been focusing on all these fiction things. So one of the main differences between fiction and nonfiction stories is that fiction stories are not real, right? They're make pretend. They can sound like they're real, like realistic fiction. You can read a story about a little girl who goes to school and has a bully like the Recess Queen. So that could be a story that could happen, but it is make pretend. Those characters are fictional. They are fake. So that's one of the main things that separates fiction and nonfiction is that these are all not real. They're all made up. So when we go to read these stories, this is just like a story talk. When we talk about them, we're talking just about a story. So I like to call that story talk. When we read fiction books, we read to enjoy. We just want to sit back and enjoy a good story. Sometimes we like them, sometimes we don't. Even if you're an adult reader, there are chances that you pick up a book and it wasn't enjoyable. But the whole point of reading a fiction story is we want to sit back and relax and we want to enjoy the story. When we're reading fiction books too, they have illustrations, which means that either they were drawn or a computer designed them, so they were made up. Okay, somebody sat down, there was an illustrator that sat down and drew out all the pictures or used a computer or used different materials to make the illustrations. And sometimes that's where we get some of our clues from when we're reading fiction books is from those illustrations, those drawings, those pictures. Also, when we think about fiction text, we also have to think about, and we just talked about this right before vacation, that fiction stories have a beginning, a middle, and an end. We read the stories in order. You can't just pick up a fiction book and start reading in the middle of the story because you'll miss out on pieces that you needed to know in the beginning. So it flows. A fiction story flows. It has a beginning, a middle, and end. And when you go and you sit down and read it, you start at the beginning and you get introduced to the characters, the setting. And remember, you go off that roller coaster, your characters start to have that problem towards the middle or challenge. And then as you're reading towards the end, you finally get to that solution. So there's a beginning, a middle, and an end. Also, another important element for fiction stories is those characters. And usually the setting has a very important part in the story, right? The setting lets us know where they are, which also helps develop what the story is going to be about. And last, we spent a great deal of talking about this too, is that fiction stories have a problem and a solution. Your character will face some sort of problem, challenge, obstacle in some point of your story. And hopefully by the end of the story, there is some sort of solution. Your character has overcome that challenge. So these are all the elements that we have been practicing since the beginning of the year. Finding your beginning, middle, and end, finding your characters, talking about how your character's feeling, talking about how your character changes maybe throughout the story. We also find that problem and solution. So these are all the elements of a fiction story. This is what we've been working on since September. Now we've got to kind of change our brain and go to that nonfiction. And a lot of these are just going to be opposites, okay? So if a fiction story is not real, a nonfiction story is real, okay? It is real. Instead of sitting down and talking about the story, when you read a nonfiction text, you're talking facts, true pieces of information. So it's not a story talk, it's a fact talk, okay? And facts are true pieces of information, true pieces of information. In a fiction, you sit down to read and enjoy a nice story. When you're reading a nonfiction book, you're sitting down to read to learn something. So you're not reading to enjoy, you are reading to learn. Okay, you're learning about a specific topic that you chose. So if you picked a nonfiction book about dolphins, you're going to read to learn about true pieces of information about dolphins. If you pick a book about the Arctic, you're going to learn real information about the Arctic. So you're reading to learn something new. Now, this illustrations part, you might be thinking, well, there's pictures in nonfiction books too. In most nonfictions, notice I didn't say all, in most nonfiction books, they're not illustrations, they're actually real photos. So they're photographs that they have put in the book. So that if you're reading about the polar bears, there might be an actual photo of a polar bear out from the wild. So they're not illustrations, they're real photographs. Now remember, I did say most. I actually have seen some nonfiction books where it is still an illustration, okay? But most of them will have photographs. And the interesting thing about a nonfiction book is there's not really a beginning, middle, or an end. Most nonfiction books have this thing in the front of the book called the table of contents. And what you can do is you can use the table of contents to help you find certain information in a book. So if you're reading about habitats, which are environments that animals and plants live in, you can open up to the front cover of the book and you may say, you know what, I don't want to know about the ocean habitat. I might want to learn about the rainforest. And maybe the rainforest is on page 20. You actually can skip all of those pages and just focus on what habitat you wanted to learn or what you were specifically looking for information. So you don't have to read that beginning, middle, and end. You can use this tool, which is called a text feature. We're going to talk about that later on. A text feature. This table of contents will tell you that what information is in the story and what page you can find it on. So if, like I said, if you're learning about the different habitats in the world and you didn't want to learn about the Arctic and you wanted to just focus on the rainforest, you could just flip right to that page and just read about what you were looking for. So that's another little difference. So it's not a beginning, middle, and end. We have a table of contents. You can kind of bounce through a nonfiction book. There are no characters or setting. You're not going to find a character or setting. You may read about a person, but that person would be a real live person. Those are a different kind of nonfiction books. Those are called biographies and autobiographies. So you may pick up a book about George Washington and you may say, well, the character of the story is George Washington. Well, he's not a character because he's not fictional. He's a real person that we had. He was our first president. So it may be about somebody and you may learn about his life and his struggles and all the things that he did. However, it's not a character. So there are no characters and settings, but they have these things in the back of the book to give you information. Things like index or glossary. I put these two together because when you read a nonfiction book, an index and a glossary are things that you will always find at the end, okay? It's one of the last few pages of a nonfiction book, okay? A glossary has a role and an index has a role. They give you two different types of information, but they are always at the end of the story, okay? Table of contents comes at the beginning, which is why I wrote it first. Index and glossary come at the end. And last but not least, they are true information. So anything that you read in a nonfiction book is going to be true information, which means the author probably did some research, did some studying. Maybe he went out and investigated on their own. Maybe if he wrote a book about the United States, he probably visited the different places in the United States in order to have true information, okay? Or accurate information. Sometimes you might hear that word. How do you know this is accurate? Well, we know it's accurate because it's a nonfiction. So that author spent some time doing some researching, doing some studying, doing some investigating, doing some traveling in order to give you true information. So when you're sitting down and you're looking at a book, you need to ask yourself, is this book fiction? Is it not real? Am I just going to sit down and enjoy it? Does it have characters? Does it have illustrations? Or maybe the book that you have chosen is a real book and you're reading to learn something. You're reading to get facts. It has real live photographs of whatever topic that you're learning about. It has a table of contents at the beginning of the story. It has an index and a glossary at the end of the story. And then you can tell yourself, I know that that author did some researching and studying, and I know that the information is true information. I'm sitting down to read, to learn something. Now, I love nonfiction books. I think they're great. I think that when you sit down and you can pick any topic you're thinking of, animals, places in the world, this is where you're going to fall into, is those nonfiction books when you want to study different things or learn new things about our world. So I really enjoy nonfiction. So tomorrow, I'm going to pull us back up. We're going to go over the different elements, and then you in your Google Classroom are going to sort. I'm going to have these words in boxes, and you're going to have to tell me, where would I find characters? Would I find them in a fiction story or a nonfiction story? Where would I find facts? Would it be in a fiction story or a nonfiction story? So we really want you to start thinking about these two different types of genres. It's a fancy word for type, two different types of work. But genres. We have fiction genre and we have the nonfiction genre. Very different types of books. So to help you, I do have this little song that I would like you to listen to. That's going to talk to you about the different parts of a fiction and a nonfiction book. And then as we go along this week, you're going to be exposed to nonfiction stories where you're going to have to look for facts and true pieces of information. So we're going to keep moving into this. We're not going to forget about fiction. We're just going to put it to the side right now. We're really going to focus on nonfiction and how to read a nonfiction book. It's a little different than reading a fiction. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so you can listen to my little song I have. It's very quick, boys and girls.
Fiction is pretend, a make-believe creation. Non-fiction is real, it gives us information. Fiction's full of characters, a plot and a setting. In non-fiction, it's real life knowledge that you're getting. A book with talking dogs, that's fiction. A book about the life cycle of frogs. Non-fiction, a book about a mouse who saves the day. That's fiction, a book that teaches you how to dance ballet. Non-fiction, a book about a fire-breathing man. That's fiction, a book about the different types of plants. Non-fiction. Remember, this video exclusive is available for
All right, boys and girls, I told you it was a very quick song, but it gives you a couple examples of what a fiction story is and what a nonfiction is. So when you're sitting at home and you're choosing a book, do you tend to lean more towards a fiction book or do you tend to lean more towards a non-fiction book? Everybody has their different opinions and their different likes. So be thinking about this. Tomorrow we're going to review and we're going to do some sorting. And towards the end of the week, we're going to learn how to pick out facts from a story. And maybe you didn't learn something and you're still wondering about something. So we're also going to talk about that. All right, I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you guys tomorrow. Bye.